Welcome to episode 19 of the Father and Son Watch Horror Movies podcast. I am your co-host, the Father, also known as Pastor Matt, also known as Matt Rawlings. I am joined as always by my trusty co-host,
Jackson the Son, and I now know that Bub the Zombie was really listening to this podcast on his headphones, so you know he has good taste.
Is that what he was doing?
I think so.
With the Walkman? Okay.
Yeah, well, Dr. Frankenstein was blasting this through his ears.
We are a spoiler podcast. We spoil the movies we review, and today we are continuing our run through the late, great George A. Romero's Dead films, and today that brings us to Day of the Dead from 1985.
First came the night, then came the dawn. Now comes the most eagerly awaited day in horror film history. George A. Romero's Day of the Dead.
We've been punished by the Creator. We visited a curse.
Hello! Is anyone there?
For the few remaining, their only hope of survival is to find a cure.
You're wasting time trying to define what's happening.
But the odds are against them.
We're in the minority now. Something like 400,000 to 1 by my calculations.
And so is Captain Rhodes.
Anybody else have any questions about the way things are gonna run around here from now on?
Their one chance is Bub.
It's working on instinct. A deep, dark, primordial instinct.
But their time is running out.
They can be fooled, don't you see? They can be tricked into being good little girls and boys. The same way we were tricked into it and promised some reward to come.
But when the tricks wouldn't work,
They're learning. They're actually learning.
their world fell apart.
Let him go! God damn it! I'll cut you.
Shoot that woman or you're dead.
It wasn't very nice, you know. That wasn't very nice at all. You can just sit there in the dark, think about what you've done. Think about it. Think.
The dead shall have their day. Day of the Dead.
Extraordinary, isn't it?
Before we get there, buddy, I know that you and I both, we are both listeners to Horror Movie Podcast and the Land of the Creeps. And so I want to, first of all, wish our friends Greg Amortis and Miss Pearl congrats, because they were just married this weekend.
The one of the greatest horror couples in the community.
Oh, absolutely. And so, yeah, I know they've sent you stuff that, Pearl thinks you're great. And so we just want to wish them a big congrats and hope know that they'll have a great, great future together. We also, because we listen to H&P and this is their October, they did the 70s and the 80s, their top 10, which I just finished listening to a while back. This is about an hour or so ago. And they're also having Campfire Tales on there. So I thought about calling in my Campfire Tale. I've done it before, but the problem is they want it 3 minutes. And as a pastor and attorney, I can't even clear my throat in 3 minutes.
Yep.
So here's my Campfire Tale. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Ready? Okay. When I was 15 years old and I had just run away from home and I was crashing on a friend's couch, I have a buddy, still a great buddy, who was dating a girl, and the girl had a good-looking cousin and said, "Hey, do you want to go over and meet her?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And so we rode over there, walked in, they were playing with a Ouija board.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me, well, this is Matt. Do you want to talk to Matt? And the Ouija board said, no. And they said, why? Are you afraid of Matt? It said, no. It said, well, who are you afraid of? And it spelled out D-A-D.
Oh.
My father's pastor. And so I tell you that story, tell you this one. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, this is one of my earliest memories. My dad's had a church in this small town I live in since about 1966, 67. And there was a woman at the church who had a daughter who swore that the daughter was demon possessed. My father, your grandfather, being who he is, sent her to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said, we can't find anything wrong with her. We don't know what's going on. And so she was becoming violent. He went over to their house one day, found her slithering on her belly like a snake and flicking her tongue. And so one day I was there with your Uncle Greg, your eldest uncle, my oldest brother, and the couple brought their daughter in to see Dad, and she started throwing a fit, cursing loudly. And so my dad walked up to her, put his hands on her head, prayed, and she was fine after that. She never had another problem. And
Holy
when they
crap.
cleaned out her room, they found a Ouija board, which is why to this day I do not mess with Ouija boards.
So is Veronica a true story?
They claim it is. The Spanish police filed a report, and they claim it is a true story. Yes.
Yeah, I'm freaked out now. I mean,
Yeah,
who knew Hasbro could produce a thing that could talk to the devil?
exactly. But no, I told people, I remember when HMP covered Veronica, they were like, if this was a true story, that'd be scary. I was like, guys, did you not read about it? They claim it is a true story. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's, I don't mess with Ouija boards. I saw at the Salem Fright Fest this weekend, they had a giant Ouija board.
Ooh.
People on, I was like, nope, no thanks. Nope, not.
That's the thing though. The one of the rules is you have to play it with other people. You have to use it with other people, because if you don't, then it'll possess you or whatever. But I guess if you're in a huge crowd of 450 people, it probably wouldn't be too scary.
I don't know. I wouldn't participate. No, thank you. So let's talk about Day of the Dead from 1985. We've done Night of the Living Dead. We've done Dawn of the Dead. Tell me your initial thoughts on Day of the Dead. Where does it rank from you with these first three Dead movies?
Sure. Well, I'm ashamed to admit it. Not really ashamed, but some people would call this blasphemy. I used to think this was my favorite of the first three, just because I felt like nobody else gave it the credit it should have gotten, and obviously it doesn't. It gets that credit now. It used to be the case that everybody thought this was the worst movie of the trilogy, and that it was just terrible compared to the first two, and that it didn't deliver on what the first two were about. So people trashed it, and that was the way it was for a long time until recently. People are looking at it with a more critical eye, and they're they're thinking of it more positively. And so now that everybody, this is like a hipster kind of thing, I guess. Now that everybody likes it, my opinion of it is still that it's gone to, it's the least good of the trilogy, but it's not bad by any standard. It's a great movie, and you're in my ranking later, in my rating, you'll see that. But there are some problems with it that I'd like to discuss. But overall, this was a great movie. If this was a standalone movie, this would be one of the best zombie movies of all time outside of the Romero Dead franchise. But it's part of the original three. You got Night, then Dawn, then Day. And, it doesn't deserve the trash that was heaped on it back in the day, but it's not the best of the three.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Now, this was part of, Romero, according to him anyway, at the interviews, he wasn't planning on a third movie. He got offered a 3-film distribution deal after Dawn of the Dead, because Dawn of the Dead was a success, especially internationally. And so they said, we'll give you a 3-picture deal if one of the movies is a sequel to Dawn of the Dead. So he purposely withheld it to be the third because he wanted to get the money for the first two. The first one was Night Riders, which was a flop. And then he had Creepshow, which is a minor hit. And then he had to do Day of the Dead. I really like the premise. My problem with Day of the Dead is that the acting is over the top.
Yeah.
I think the tension is manufactured. If you want to talk about great tension in a movie without having to manufacture, doing it organically, I think John Carpenter's The Thing does that really well. Where you can kind of tell from the beginning that these characters are kind of apathetic about each other. They don't really care.
Sure.
And I like that. And I think he could have done that with Day of the Dead. Instead, he's got the cast just letting loose. And they're really doing, because most of them were theater actors, they're doing theater work. And the difference between theater work and movie work is, of course, if you're doing movie work, you're playing to the camera. If you're doing theater work, you're playing for the back row, which means you kind of have to overact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem with Day of the Dead that I have. I'm still coming in high. I agree with you. I still love this movie. Don't get ticked at me. I still like this movie, but I agree with you because, for me, because of that, it's the weakest of the first three. What are your
Right.
thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that's okay. So we both agree that this is a really good movie, and I think the reason that we're gonna sound like we're coming down low on this movie is because all of the things that this movie does well, the other two did well. This is a continuation of that, and even an evolution of that in some cases, like with the makeup. But I feel like we've already talked about all the things that are good about this movie in Night and Dawn, because it does have a lot of thematic unity, I think, with those movies. It very much does feel like a sequel, even though there are no reoccurring characters or locations. It does feel like a continuation of the writing of the first two. But um, there are negatives in this movie that weren't in Night or Dawn, that we have to talk about because we have to cover new things.
Yeah, I don't. When we talked about Night of the Living Dead, there was so much to say. With Dawn of the Dead, there was so much to say. I don't feel like Day of the Dead has as much originality to it,
Mm-hmm.
into what it has to say. I will talk about what Romero has claimed that he saw in it, what he was trying to get through. But I don't think he delivered his message as clearly in Day of the Dead as in Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Do you disagree?
Really? I don't, um, I wouldn't disagree completely, but I feel like there are some new themes in this one that are interesting and continuations. I just feel like the themes are more in your face with this movie than they were with the last two, and I think that's why they can seem a little muddled, because whereas there were subtext and you could read into them as you wanted in the previous ones, now when we have characters like Bub, and the character's pretty much telling us, how to feel that the humans are the real monsters and the zombies are, uprising. When you're given the theme straight out, they can seem kind of confusing because you didn't come to that conclusion yourself. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, I see what you're saying, and I know you have a great love for Bub. I know you've
Mm-hmm.
always had a great love for
Bub is
Bub.
awesome.
I used to call you Bub when you were a baby, and that's where it came from. So, yeah, I know you love Bub, and I love Bub. And there is a great, like, if you don't have the Shout Factory release, the Blu-ray with the documentary The World's End, I would recommend that. But you can tell that the script was, and I know they did this with the first two as well, but Romero kind of switched up the script for a number of reasons. The original script that he wrote for Day of the Dead was closer to Land of the Dead, which we'll get to
Mm-hmm.
next week. But they kept cutting the budget on him because he didn't want it to be rated. He wanted Savini to be cut loose and do whatever he wanted to do. And so you had that, and he wanted that. But when the moment he came around and said, "I want this unrated," they came around and said, "Well, we were going to give you $7 million. Now we're going to give you $3 million."
Mm-hmm.
And so you got the budget cut. But I've heard Romero interviewed on this, and he kind of hints around that, kind of like Oliver Stone at the time was really upset with movies like Rambo and Top Gun and all that kind of stuff, and like Stone, he distrusted the Reagan government, and he didn't want the military to be portrayed as these superhuman good guys, and so he kind of goes the opposite direction with the military being the bad guys. First of all, in 1985, after Reagan had won a landslide re-election, I don't think that was the message that was going to strike box office gold at that time. And I'm just not sure that message comes across as clearly. I really think that when you watch Dawn of the Dead, you can see, as we talked about, definitely see the consumerism angle. You can definitely see, I think, the tribalism angle with Night of the Living Dead. You can kind of see the racial tensions at the time and the kind of tensions of the 60s. With Day of the Dead, I'm just not sure the message is that clear. I just don't resonate with it.
I think I've decoded the message upon rewatch of this movie.
Go for it.
I really think the focus of this movie is that theme that was carried over from Night and Dawn, which is that, that classic people are the monsters, zombies are the new intelligent race, basically. Or they're the more civilized. They're just a walking, force of nature. They don't quarrel within themselves. They're not selfish. They just are. And there's that.
You got that. Yeah, there's that line from Aliens, right, where Sigourney Weaver is, saying, I don't know which one is worse. You don't see the aliens screwing each other over for a profit motive, and you don't see the zombies do that either. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and there's that, and there's also the theme that maybe zombies are more human than we are, because we see with Bub, I mean, he's like an infant. The emotions he's experiencing are pure. They're not influenced by any other outside force. What he's experiencing is like purely his own. And it's almost like when you become a zombie, you're a baby, and you like the longer you go on, the more used to being a zombie you are, I guess, because that's what we see later with Land of the Dead, but like with the intelligent zombies. But I'm feeling like maybe that wasn't explored to its fullest extent, and I feel like there would have been more of that had the budget been, twice. It was originally supposed to be $7 million, like you said, cut it down to $3 million. That's over half the budget. Yeah. And I would really like to see that Ben-Hur zombie movie that Tom Savini talks so much about, this huge cinematic epic that would just encapsulate everything. And I think the reason this feels like a lesser sequel is because the full circle of resolution couldn't be met, because segments of the circle had to be cut out from the story as time went on. So you see characters' roles becoming less and less, and their emotions being fleshed out less and less, and the themes being fleshed out less and less as you go along. So this final script is basically just a neutered version of the original story.
Yeah, but I think we get that in Land of the Dead. From what Romero is saying, I mean, Land of the Dead was the movie he wanted to make here. But once he got his budget, he knew what he was working with. I mean, he basically said, I mean, this is the movie that we wanted to shoot. I mean, once he understood what he was doing and the budget he had and so forth, this is the movie that he wanted. And he wanted a commentary kind of on Reagan era kind of action movies and all that kind of stuff. I can appreciate that now, and I understand why the appreciation has grown. Now that a generation like myself who didn't grow up with Vietnam and so forth now has grown up with Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth, and seeing that no, war is not just sending a guy full of steroids and an AK-47 over to gun everybody down and he never gets hit himself, that's not what war is, and all that kind of stuff. I see that now. I see that commentary now. I don't think that it was going to resonate then just because of the mood of the country. But I think we got the movie Romero really knew he could make, especially after he knew that when Knight Riders was a flop, he was not going to get a bunch of money for another movie, because Knight Riders was really a flop. And if you've seen it, it's not a bad movie, but it's not. I don't know why he thought guys on motorcycles, jousting with each other would be this huge hit. I don't understand what George was thinking there. But
Dawn of the Dead was successful, and he's like, oh, motorcycles, interesting.
I guess, yeah. And so it didn't quite resonate. But I do see that one of the things he does do in kind of the evolution here is he has a much stronger female lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this.
Yeah. One of my main complaints with Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead is the fact that, and we discussed the female character in Night of the Living Dead and why she had it's not talking about women in general, just like all women are useless in horror movies. It's just that woman, that character is that way. But with Dawn, I feel like all over it was just kind of subpar, the female characters, and that they didn't really serve a purpose other than, I don't know. But with this movie, the lead protagonist, I would say, even though we have a bunch of main characters, I would say the lead protagonist is Sarah, played by Rory Cardile. I feel like she's really well written, and that's surprising to me because we didn't really see that with Dawn or Night, but this is an outstanding performance from her as well.
Yeah, and I love that, if you've, like I said, on the Shout Factory Blu-ray, there is a documentary, and they interview her and so forth, and they note that, of course, her name is Sarah, the mother of all nations, right? And she's she's kind of the source of hope, and and she is kind of BA. I mean, she takes on she's got an Uzi going after zombies and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. She's not just cowering. She's a strong female lead.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we get into the movie, and we'll talk about production and special effects and all that kind of stuff. But Terry Alexander, who plays the helicopter pilot, he gives a speech that I think kind of wraps up the franchise, along with what Romero has said in interviews, which is, he basically says God figured we were too big for our britches, and it was time for kind of a comeuppance. And that's kind of what George also said in Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead, which is until human beings learn to actually work together and love each other and all that kind of stuff, that this is kind of a biblical plague that you get. And so I liked, obviously, as a pastor, I like that spin. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting, talking about that this was originally supposed to be this huge epic. I wonder if, and I've heard that this movie in its original form was described as a biblical, a story of biblical proportions. I'm wondering if maybe there would have been more of that symbolism, that plague type thing, because there is a lot of that, like the opening sequence where we see that deserted ghost city,
Right.
basically. It is very much like The Stand or something you'd see like that. And I'm wondering if that the conclusion would have seen, how we see them on the beach. I wonder if that would have been more like like a Promised Land tie-in compared to the plagues in Egypt. I wonder if that's where the story was going. We just didn't get to see that fully fleshed out, so we're left with what we see here.
Oh, I think you're probably right. I mean, given Romero's Catholic background and so forth, I think that's probably where he was going. And just kind of maybe it's time to hit, restart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where he was going. And so, absolutely, I think that's what he's been building with Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and then with Day of the Dead is kind of this. Maybe we just need to start over. Because we've screwed it so badly. We just need to start it all over again, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fair. And another thing that I want to say about this is, I one of my gripes with the Romero Dead trilogy series overall is that it didn't end here. I kind of feel like Day of the Dead would have been the perfect conclusion to the trilogy, because we kind of see that starting over, like like Noah after the flood, that kind of thing, where they're on the beach. But then we get Land of the Dead, and we're right back into the same kind of thing. You know what I mean? I feel like this could have been the perfect end to the series. But I don't think, like you said, Romero wanted to make the movie that he was going to make had he had the full budget. So that was his incentive to do Land of the Dead. And I'm glad we got Land of the Dead, more content, from Romero. But as it stands, I think this is one of the best horror trilogies, right up there with Evil Dead and the original Frankenstein trilogy.
Oh wow, yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not, we're kind of picking this apart and we're talking about it, but I think we both love it, and so. I would definitely put it up there. And I got to give the cast and crew credit. This was hell to film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the exterior shots they shot in Florida where Romero was living at the time, and they got the city to close down an entire street so they could get the alligator and they could get all that kind of stuff. And that's great. But they shot for 4 weeks in a limestone mine.
And it was freezing cold, I hear.
Freezing cold, dust everywhere. They're breathing this stuff in. There are bats and bat guano everywhere. Every single person on the cast and crew got sick, and they pushed through it. And you got to give them credit for that.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about before. That the worst productions, to work on, often come out as the best movies. We see that with Jaws and The Evil Dead. I think that's interesting, that these characters are supposed to be angry, and they're actually angry on set because they're all miserable. I wonder if that added to their performance and added to the overall mood of the movie.
Oh, I guarantee it did. Because they all talked about when you watch the documentary about the making of, they're all like, it was terrible, it was horrible, I'd never do it again, and I had the best time of my life.
Yep. I mean, this would be the worst movie, and after that, it's all uphill, working on set. Well, I guess you got to have that worst production before you can have your best one.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, Lori Cardell still talks, favorably about the filming. Her dad, by the way, was in Night of the Living Dead. He played one of the reporters in Night of the Living Dead. Yeah. And so, but she talked about how she has asthma and she's pretty sure she got it from this movie, and she's still not regretting doing it because it was so much fun. And we'll talk more about the production because there's one other thing I want to bring up because I want to give Joe Pilato a rest in peace, a big pat on the back because one of the things he did was incredible. But here's what I can say about Day of the Dead. I don't like it as much as Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead. I still love it, but I think this is Savini's special effects masterpiece.
Mm-hmm. And Greg Nicotero.
Yeah, Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger. I mean, you had two of the three from K&B, on set working on this as Savini's assistants. And Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, I just listened to Howard Berger on the Postmortem podcast last week, and he was talking about how Tom Savini's a magician and that this was just his, and Savini says, this is my masterpiece. And what he did that in this movie that we talked about last time, he didn't do the gray zombies, the bad makeup. So you have much better looking zombies, but
yeah, I find
effects are amazing.
I agree, and I find it interesting that the zombies here kind of look like the Walking Dead zombies that which Greg Nicotero, would go on to work on. I find that interesting that these were like the best that practical effects could get, so that still carries over to TV shows in this day and age.
Oh yeah, I mean, Greg Nicotero was ready to go to medical school, before this, and he just decided, no, I'm having too much fun, and so. They go on to do K&B, of course, does everything from Dances with Wolves to the current Creep Show. I mean, they're absolutely incredible. And poor Joe Pilato, who died a few years ago, his death scene, where he is pulled apart by zombies. Have you heard the story behind this?
Yeah, I have. I'll let you tell it though.
Oh man. So Savini goes and he always says, the best guts you can get are real guts.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets pig intestines and pig guts and all that kind of stuff. He uses them in scene after scene after scene. If you see like the one scene where the zombie breaks free, one of his arms breaks free from the table and he wakes up and his guts slide onto the floor, those are those pig guts. You see another character do the same thing. Those are the same pig guts. So they put the pig guts in the refrigerator. They go to Florida to shoot the exterior scenes, and somebody unplugs the refrigerator.
Oh, no.
But there's pig guts in there. They come back to the limestone mine, and they can smell the pig guts from outside. I mean, they're so rancid. The entire special effects team, so they get together with Joe Pilato and they tell him, okay, don't drink anything, don't eat anything. This is the last shot of the movie. We can only do it once. You can't throw up. They fill his fake body full of this rancid stuff. Savini, Nicotero, Howard Berger, they've all got gas masks on. They've all got cologne under their nose, all this other kind of stuff. Poor Joe Pilato has nothing. And he's got to whiff all this in when they pull it apart. And he says he was interviewed, I guess it was 2005 or something like that for the documentary. He said, I can still smell it.
Yeah, I bet. The other day I found something that had mold on it and I just about wanted to throw up. I can't imagine having a dead pig basically being pulled out right in front of your face and having to sit there for take after take.
Oh, it's just atrocious. I mean, bless his heart. So, and Joe Pilato, of course, that was his best known role, though we can also see him. We covered Quentin Tarantino's movies with Big Bill and Dr. Shock. And we also want to say we hope Dr. Shock's recovering well from his surgery. I think his birthday is today, so happy birthday, Dave. And so I can't even imagine that. Now, even though I'm a huge fan of the special effects in this movie, you're a musician.
Right.
I'm a hack musician. I played in one punk band, and we played a bunch of Ramones songs because 3 chords was the best I could do. Are you a fan of the score in Day of the Dead?
Okay. So the score has been criticized a lot for how minimalist it is. It isn't as memorable as it is in Dawn.
It's the Goblin score in Dawn.
I love the score. That theme is underused. It's underused, but I think it's perfect because we get it in the most pivotal scene in the movie, which coincidentally is the first scene in the movie. That I guess it's a dream scene, is what you call it, a vision, perhaps, of Sarah in the room with the zombie arms bursting through, the wall. I took it for granted until I watched Stranger Things Season 3. And do you know what scene I'm talking about? Where they're in the movie theater watching Day of the Dead. And
where they sneak in, right.
Right. And that scene happens. For some reason, it struck me, it's perfect. The fact that we don't hear... One of the criticisms I have with movies in general is when they overuse a certain music cue over and over again, where we become desensitized to it. As much as I love Rob Zombie and his movies, I feel like his Halloween... the first Halloween remake, it used the Michael Myers, the Halloween theme way too much. It used it like every 3 minutes. And it would just carry on and on and on. But with this movie, I like the fact that the theme is reserved and it's just this quiet synth building up to like a terrifying conclusion. I like that. And I think it works with this movie because for most of this movie, it's a very reserved kind of setting where you don't see a lot of those huge action set pieces that we got in Dawn until the very end. This is mostly a discussion of people and the inner turmoils they have. So the score reflects that. It's not big and flashy. It's just subtle. You have little hints in the background, and I like that.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it that way because I've lived with this movie for a long time. I first saw it on VHS probably around 9. It's grown on me, but I've never liked the score.
Okay. Is it just because it's not what you're used to? Just not that big goblin, like rock soundtrack?
No, I just don't think it often fits.
Sure.
I just don't think it fits. I mean, there are times when you're going through Dr. Frankenstein's, going through his lab. You're looking at body parts. You're seeing remember the body with just the brain at the head?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I just don't think the score fits.
What would you have rather seen? I don't remember what it sounds like in there, but I do remember it seeming strange to me that there wasn't more of a gothic, you know what I mean? Like, I was expecting more of that reveal in movies where they're like, come to the lab, Let me show you something that's going to freak you out. And then you get that suspenseful music all built up to like gothic sounding. Yet this movie is very subtle though. So I don't remember what the soundtrack sounded like in that scene, but I'd like to hear what you would like to have seen.
I would like something bolder. I don't think I disagree. I don't think it's that subtle. There's a lot of gore in this. There's a lot of, like I said, manufactured tension.
Sure.
And so I would like to have a score that emphasized that. If they were going to do it that way. Like I said, I wouldn't have done it that way. I would have done it more of the way John Carpenter did The Thing, where, they're just almost they could care less that the other people are there. They just, instead of being bug-eyed and yelling, I think it would have been better if they were, just kind of ignoring each other and just could care less. And they're just kind of existing. I don't understand. I know George Romero's happy with it. Joe Pilato has admitted that he said he thought his performance was over the top. That he thought
but
it
I
was
think
a
it's
little too much.
I think it's perfect for this movie. I want to talk about that at some point.
All right. Well, let's talk about it. Tell me why you think Joe Pilato's performance is is good. Now, I like Joe Pilato. I've seen him in other
Mm-hmm.
things. I like him. He was an experienced theater actor. But even he said, George, why aren't you railing me in? This is too much. I think it's over. When he would see the dailies and Romero liked it, I don't see it.
Well, I think you're forgetting that Dawn of the Dead had some of the zaniest performances ever in a movie. I mean, like this with this movie, I think the reason it feels out of place is because everybody else is so reserved.
I don't think the four leads were over the top in Dawn of the Dead. I think the
Maybe
biker
not.
was.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of that whole zany, basically that Return of the Living Dead, style of ragtag group of people who are just spouting off lingo and you can't really follow their brand of craziness. But I feel like it's more extreme in this movie, whereas they were having in Dawn of the Dead, everybody's having fun, cracking off one-liners to each other for a while. And with this movie, everybody's kind of sunk into a depressive state. So when Captain Rhodes is screaming, at the top of his lungs and slamming on the table and pointing guns at people, I think that spices the movie up. I think this movie would be a little bit more boring without him in it.
No, I agree with that, but I think he still could have delivered a little more subtle performance. And I think he wanted to. Now, I will thank God that actually Tom Savini wanted to play Rhodes and lobbied for it. And George said no. He wanted Joe Pilato. And I do think Joe Pilato is better than Tom Savini. Look, I love Tom Savini as a makeup effects artist. I think he's done some interesting things as a director. I can't stand him as an actor.
Really? I like him okay as the biker, the lead. I guess he's not the lead, but one of the bikers in Dawn of the Dead. I like that part. I don't know if you remember this part, but it was pointed out. I watched a video review. I don't remember what it was, but they had the clip from the movie where he's spying on the people in the mall from afar with binoculars.
Right.
And he's like, they've got trucks. And the guy beside him is like, yeah, trucks. I don't know. There's something like offbeat about his style of over the top acting. Tom Savini is good in a certain type of movie, just not this one.
No, I wouldn't. I do prefer Joe Pilato, even though I think Pilato went too far. And it's interesting if you watch the interviews, like a lot of the guys who played the soldiers that wasn't their personality type. They were theater actors. They were overdoing it on purpose because that's what Romero said he wanted. And Romero's like, oh, I think it even works well as a radio drama. I'm not so sure about that. God bless George. I love his stuff. I think it would have worked a lot better with a little more subtle performances.
Sure. I think maybe we could have seen more subtlety from him, but he needs to be extreme in some scenes for you to hate him, right? I mean, nobody deserves that death that he gets, but maybe Captain Rhodes does a little bit.
I don't know if he needed to be over the top. I mean, look, when I think over like villains, or I think about creepy people, like right now, have you seen Sicario?
No.
Oh, you have to see Sicario. Benicio del Toro in that, I think, is, he's so creepy and yet he's so subtle. And I think that Rhodes could have been that kind of character. So I do think he could have subtly done it. I'm just not a fan of, like I said, when you see the guys literally like huffing and puffing and eyes bulging, that really kind of takes me out of the movie. It just
Sure.
kind of, I just don't appreciate that.
But doesn't it make you glad that they get killed in real cool ways?
But I think you still could have been subtle and evil, and I would have been glad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see.
And
But I don't think Rhodes could have delivered his final line convincingly. Choke on him if he hadn't been so, over the top before in the movie. Like,
no, I think
if he delivered a one-liner on his death after being a subtle villain, I don't know that it would have been as believable. Like, when you watch.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
take for example. All right, so take for example just Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, or take Kevin Spacey in Seven.
Yep.
Okay, I think they could have delivered it that way and been vile and evil, and you still would have rooted for it without it going over the top.
Okay. Yeah, I can agree with that.
And so that's my only point. And that's really my only knock against this movie. I like the script. I like the setting. I like the premise. I love the special effects. It's just some of the acting. And not all of it. I mean, like, look, the guy who plays Laurie's lover who finally loses it and is like, remember, we're a spoiler podcast, who finally loses it. You know what? These people deserve to die. I'm letting the zombies in. I think he's amazing in it.
Yep.
I think he's fantastic. I think Laurie Cardell is very good in it. I do think that there are a lot of good performances. I think some of the soldiers are just over the top. That's my only point.
Yep. What about the Jamaican guy with the whole bachelor pad down there in the limestone mine?
Did you mind that?
Not really. Not as much as I expected I would. I don't really like over the top depictions of that kind of thing. Like in the movie Freaked, this is a deep dive, but Freaked starring Alex Winter from Bill and Ted, you've got those Rastafarian eyeball monsters. I think this could have gone really over the top of every single thing he said was, yeah, man, you know what I mean? But he's a pretty funny character. I mean, he had some relief and makes Sarah feel like she's at home.
He didn't bother me. I mean, there are times when that kind of, where people for some reason go to that. I'm not, on the one hand, I'm not sure why he had that accent. I know George Romero wrote it that way. I'm not sure why. I'm the same way with 31. With Rob Zombie's 31, I have no idea why that guy has a Jamaican accent.
Yeah, I guess.
Do you?
I think it. No, I think it's just because the actor. I think it's just George Romero wanted something different, and actors love to do accents.
But they shouldn't always. I'm thinking of the movie Soap Dish. It's just, I'd say no to accents.
I'm thinking of the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Leonardo DiCaprio's Southern accent.
Yeah, he should never try to do a Southern accent. Neither should Kevin Costner, or Nicolas Cage.
He goes into like a little bit of a British accent whenever he's trying to imitate the Southern accent. I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, so this movie was a flop. It was a box office flop. Does that surprise you?
Not really. After Dawn of the Dead was a success overseas, and people were expecting more of that when they come in and they get more of a psychological, more of like a drama. There are lots of parts in this movie that are just straight drama concerning people. I'm not surprised that they didn't come back for another showing or tell their friends to go see it, because you can't really recommend a movie that people are going to think is boring within the first 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't what people were expecting, and I think it's all about that. Like I said earlier, if this was in a vacuum, this was just its own movie, then I think people would appreciate it a lot more, and they've come to that. But this would have been an instant classic. It's just when you compare it with the first two movies, and even with some of Romero's other movies, it falls flat in some regards, and it's good just in a different way.
Okay, I really think it wouldn't have been a box office flop other than it was released too close to Return of the Living Dead.
Sure. And
I think that was a mistake.
And Reanimator and horror movies like Fright Night. I mean, this was just a huge year for zombie movies and just horror movies in general.
But, ironically, with the exception of Return of the Living Dead, most of those movies were not box office hits. They became hits on video.
Right.
Like Fright Night. That's the first time I saw it. I mean, so it was... it's interesting that happened, but yeah, it was a flop. It didn't get a wide release. Of course, you do have at that time cinemas falling under the corporate title, so you don't have as many independent cinemas. It's released unrated largely, so it didn't get a wide release like it should have, and so that hurt it. But now it's become a huge success. I did see. Spoiler alert for our future podcast, George Romero, back when he was interviewed about this movie, when Shout Factory did their Blu-ray release, said that he's glad it's been rediscovered and now it's well loved, and now he's waiting for people to discover Survival of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
You think that's going to happen?
No. Survival of the Dead
for
sucks.
that. Yeah. So you've seen it.
Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead suck.
Wait a minute. Wait, whoa. Dire of the Dead sucks?
It's all right. When you compare it to Dawn of the Dead, though,
Oh, well, okay. But
yeah,
Dr. Kyle Walking Dead likes Dire of the Dead. I know
it's
Wolfman
fine.
Josh hates it, but
It's a found footage movie. It's fine.
okay.
There's a lot of flaws.
We are going to increase your love of found footage.
I like found footage movies, but only when they're spectacular and they have a reason to be found footage. I don't think Diary of the Dead had a reason to be found footage.
And so you haven't watched Exist yet.
What's that?
That's what we talked about last week. Is the Bigfoot's found footage movie.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. No, I haven't seen it.
I think it's on Tubi TV, so you haven't.
I'll invest in seeing that, and I do like some found footage horror movies. I just like I said, Taking of Deborah Logan, I thought was fantastic, but it needs to be it needs to actually be a found footage movie, not just a movie that they were like, oh, let's do this found footage thing because it costs less.
All right. I'm telling you, Last Exorcism is great. Paranormal Activity is great. Blair Witch is, of course, great. Exists is great. So,
but is that great?
I think it's good.
It's good. It is above average. I would give it I would give it a positive rating. But this is
all right. We'll hold off on that because we'll probably, given our opinions, I'd say we probably need to put on our last Halloween podcast for this year, we probably need to double up on Survival of the Dead and Diary of the Dead, don't you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we'll get to that. But this was a flop. It has grown. I'm glad it has. As much as I've crapped on this movie, I do like it. What else do you want to talk about this movie?
Yeah, I want to talk about Greg Nicotero. This dude, obviously, he's a legend in the horror community right now. Yeah. One of the things that I've been really thinking about recently are practical effects and why they were phased out. One thing that I don't really get is there was this weird period between where practical effects were at their absolute best. We see movies like Pumpkinhead and this movie, and then there was that period where CGI was in its early stages and really didn't look all that great, and then you have the best practical effects ever. And just because Jurassic Park used some CGI, even though they did have practical effects as well, and I think that's the best of both worlds. But people were like, oh, we can do everything and make it cheaper and CGI, so let's do that. And then you have movies like Mortal Kombat, which look, awful, or Spawn. You have those CGI scenes that look terrible. And it just makes me so angry to see that there are so many talented people out there working with something that you could actually see, you can actually touch, that look fantastic and look absolutely real, and that we just quickly hopped over onto CGI, thinking that practical effects were a sinking ship. And I love CGI when it's used well. I mean, I'm an editor. I'm a video editor. I love editing stuff into videos and rendering 3D models and stuff like that. But it angers me that we were at the best we could possibly be with these practical effects. We look at these scenes, like the guy getting his vocal cords ripped out, and all of the zombie makeup and all the deaths in this movie. It's all so good. It looks so real. And then we move on to other horror movies in the upcoming years, and we start seeing more and more computer effects that just don't look good. And I think it's a dying art. Practical effects are a dying art. It's advertised whenever we use practical effects. They're like, wow, they're bringing practical effects back. Like, how hipster are they're like, they're so hipster for using practical effects instead of CGI. But that was the precedent. That was how movies were made. And Greg Nicotero is one of those people that's keeping it alive. And he blends CGI with practical effects in shows like The Walking Dead. And I really appreciate that. I think that's when it's at its best, where you can see and touch something, but they touch it up with CGI.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm practical all the way. And I don't mind a touch up with CGI. I was really confused in the 90s when, Jurassic Park did CGI so well, and so many movies that followed did it so poorly. I didn't understand why that happened. But yeah, I agree. And by the way, go listen to the last Postmortem podcast with Howard Berger, of K&B, where he talks about practical effects. And and working with Savini and so forth, because it is worth listening to. One of my dreams is one of these days, if I ever hit the lottery or whatever, I'm sending you to Tom Savini's school for practical effects in Pittsburgh, which I think you dig. So I agree, and I'm so glad that you are an aspiring horror filmmaker who wants to use practical effects.
Yep. And going back really quickly to why those movies looked really bad with CGI when Jurassic Park looked so great, it's because they actually had something built in real life that they could base the CGI model off of. When you have how something reacts in light and how an actual thing reacts, like its texture and how it feels and how it looks under certain environments, then you can create a CGI model that looks good. When you're building something from scratch and you've never made something, you've never actually made something to base it off of, like they do with so many movies that had awful CGI, then you run into trouble, because the reason that T-Rex looks so good is because they had a real T-Rex, like not a real T-Rex, but a real practical T-Rex effect.
They had a practical, yeah.
That they could look at and shine lights on and see how the light bounced off it and see how rain ran down it and the textures of it. And that's when something really succeeds, when you have a real thing that you can compare it to. So yeah, that's fantastic, and I would love to use practical effects in movies. I just know that it's a dying art, and it's hard to find people that are experts in it, which is why I think what Tom Savini is doing is great. I mean, I see it advertised in Fango all the time. His school of, and George Romero's program for filmmaking. You see that and Tom Savini's makeup effects right next to each other, and that's just fantastic that this dying art of film and practical effects are being preserved.
Well, even if we have to do crowdfunding, we need to get you there, buddy, because we know that, and all of our listeners know, which we're blessed to have 8,000 listeners, that, what, they know you want to make practical effect horror movies one day. So we just may need to crowdfund that and make that happen. But what else do you want to talk about with Day of the Dead?
Sure. I want to talk about something that I was thinking about in this most recent viewing when I was doing my notes. I think the writing is really superb. And I know that a lot of people don't like how talky this movie is, but I think that the dialogue is all it's all really riveting. It's all really captivating. I also think that it does a really good job at some of the moral themes, talking about some of the moral themes, like, are zombies still human? And I think that's an awesome thing to explore. I mean, they do that in shows like The Walking Dead, and I hate to keep coming back to that, but that was so much inspired by these Romero Dead movies, and it linked, Nicotero linked to those two properties. But are zombies still human? That's the theme that was most prevalent, I think, in this movie. And Bub, and later we see in Land of the Dead, was named Daddy, Big Daddy.
Right.
We see that zombies are intelligent. Even in Night of the Living Dead, we saw that one zombie that picked up a stone and was breaking the glass. You know what I mean? And
or the little girl who was using a trowel. Yeah,
exactly. They're smart. I mean, not smart, but they have some intelligence, and they can remember things from their past life and use that to their advantage. I mean, even in Dawn, remember when Flyboy is turned into a zombie, he knows where they're hiding because he knew where they were hiding when he died. So now that he's a zombie, he knows where they are.
Right.
And I think that's a really good thing to explore, and all of those things are explored really well. Some of them, like you said, are a little bit muddled, but like I said, this would have been the best ending to the trilogy, to the franchise, I think. And maybe we could get like a prequel or something later on. But I heard James Rolfe from Cinemassacre compare this movie or the series to the Universal Frankenstein trilogy, where the third entry, Son of Frankenstein, in that series was so long looked down upon by fans and by critics because they didn't think it was as good as the original Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. But now, when we look back on it, it's admired for its merits. It went back to basics, and we have some great imagery and stuff like that in Son of Frankenstein. And I think this is very much the same, where people are giving it a second chance now. And it's fascinating to me that we can trash a movie so much and then come back to it later and appreciate it. I feel like the same thing happened with Rob Zombie's Halloween to a certain extent, where a lot of people just hated that movie 100%. And now we look back on it and we're like, okay, the first Rob Zombie Halloween remake was interesting and had a lot of really good things to say, but um, I'm wondering in this, this decade as it draws to a close, I'm wondering if we will look back on movies that we hate from now, and 10 years down the line, maybe 20 years, we'll look back and say that had some really interesting things to say, and it's not as bad as people say it was. And I thought, uh, what if these Blumhouse movies that people were trashing, like that one movie, and I think you know what I'm talking about, Truth or Dare, which I had a lot of fun with. Anyways, that's not what I'm trying to be talking about right now.
I'm gonna be ill.
I'm interested in seeing, letting history take its course and seeing what the future has in store for horror.
And sometimes history's right. And it was with Truth or Dare. But anyway,
Haven't seen that yet. I mean, it's a bad movie, but it's fun.
Okay.
Modern
No.
classic cinema.
Modern classic?
No.
Are you putting Truth or Dare up there with Get Out?
Nope. I'm just saying that it's not that bad, guys.
Okay. I love you, but I'm gonna disagree. So what is your rating and recommendation for Day of the Dead?
Well, I'm coming in high with this one. Maybe not as high as the others. If you'll recall, Night of the Living Dead was a 9 out of 10, and Dawn of the Dead was a perfect 10 out of 10. This is an 8.5 out of 10 for me.
Oh.
I've seen it a lot. I've seen this movie probably even more than the other two, just because I always feel like I'm missing something. I feel like there's something more to get from this movie that I'm just not paying attention enough to understand. But then I watch it over and over again and take really good notes and read what other people are talking about, and it just doesn't seem to be there. It's I don't know, but this is an 8.5 out of 10. I would recommend that you buy it. I don't own it, but that's just because I don't have any shelf space as is. So if I were to add this to my collection, I would just be a DVD rental store.
Yeah, between all your DVDs and your Funko Pop and your guitars and everything, you're running out of space and your place pretty quick. But I'm right there with you. 8.5. It's an 8.5 out of 10. It's a buy. I do own it. The Shout Factory is the one you want to get. And I do think it is worth it. I think it's a great movie. I don't think it compares to Night of the Living Dead or Dawn. It's way up there. So absolutely love it.
All right. Well, I just want to say before this episode is over that when we go into these later Romero Dead movies, that the quality for me goes down, but I think they're different. I look at them as a different series almost. Can we agree on that? That Land of the Dead and the subsequent movies are kind of a different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just listening to HNP this morning, and they were talking about how they kind of partition off Psycho 2, 3, and 4 from Psycho 1, the original. And I think you can do that. I think you have this original trilogy. Then you have Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead. And I think you have those three movies. And I think they are kind of separate. I agree.
Yeah. So when we get to them, I just want to say that my ratings won't drop that much, but I just want you guys to know that I don't feel strongly about them.
Yeah, I get that. So where can they find you on the social medias, buddy?
Sure. On Twitter, I'm at Kane_Hero12. That's KAINE_Hero12. On Letterboxd, I'm at Kane Hero. I also have a YouTube channel, which is linked in the description of both of those websites on my profile. Yeah,
good deal. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd. You can also now find Father and Son on a Facebook closed group, on Twitter, and now on Instagram, which we just launched this week. Also, our website, fatherandsonwatchhorror.com. I'm trying to blog as much as possible during the Halloween season, finishing up my top 100 horror scenes of all time. I have about 90 locked in, and so looking for the last 10. We have a number of great followers on Twitter and so forth, and so we've got a number of folks who want to come on the podcast, and so the Midwest Crypt Keeper, Ian West, Ashley, Big Bill will be back, Greg Bench, so forth. So we've got some folks coming up once we're a little more flexible with our schedule, especially come Christmas time when you're flexible. We'll hopefully have Dino and Michelle back on because we love having guests on, don't we, Bub?
Yeah, absolutely. They really feel our discussions get a little off kilter without somebody to draw us back in.
All right, pal. So be sure to check us out. Be sure to go to iTunes and subscribe. And though I was shocked this week, Megan, our producer and editor, looked it up, and we have more listeners through our website than we do have from iTunes, which is weird, but
yeah,
we do. For whatever reason, we get most of our listeners through our website. So I don't know why that is, but that's what we get. And then we do get quite a few through iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify as well, but it's mainly through our website. So thank you so much for all of you who've done it, even the one person who gave us a 1-star review.
We appreciate it nonetheless.
Nonetheless, you took your time.
Engagement. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't say what's on my mind. So
that's all right. We appreciate real feedback. It shows us that somebody's actually listening.
We're trying. We're trying. And so we're trying to get better. But anyway. All right, folks, we appreciate you turning in. Next week, we will be back with Land of the Dead, George Romero's return in the aughts. Until then, Jackson, say goodnight to the good people.
Good night, and remember, I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein.
All right, folks, and remember that the family that watches horror movies together stays together. See ya.